Donald Trump arrest is imminent. He's arriving in New York, and we're taking a look at what his team is assembling to respond to this indictment. We've got a defense team that seems like it is now assembling. We have a new player enters the game. His name is Todd Blanche. We're going to go through that and take a look at what Congress had to say about this. But what is it like in New York? Here is where we'll start. Donald Trump arrives in New York City, and he posted several things on Truth Social advising his followers and the rest of America that this was happening. He said this: I will be leaving Mar-a-Lago Monday at 12 noon, heading to Trump Tower in New York. On Tuesday morning, I will be going to, believe it or not, the courthouse. America was not supposed to be this way. Posted that early this morning, called this indictment election interference, and said that the corrupt DA, Alvin Bragg, has no case. What he does have is a venue where it is impossible for me to get a fair trial. He says it must be changed. And a Trump-hating judge, who we're going to learn a lot about today, hand-selected by a Soros-backed DA. He must be changed. Also, has the DOJ working in the DA's office unprecedented! Exclamation point. From Trump. Now, he is in New York, but this was the scene as he was leaving. Fox News had this covered, the Trump plane taking off, leaving Florida to arrive in New York.
Number 45 is ready for takeoff. The former president of the United States will come to New York City to face an indictment that will be unsealed tomorrow so the rest of the world can see what charges are against Donald J. Trump. And what will that look like? And what will he face at tomorrow's arraignment?
What will he face is going to be a good question. We'll get into that shortly. But there's a question about how he landed. Of course, he took off from Florida, arrives in New York. This is the scene as the Trump motorcade appears to drop Trump off outside Trump Tower as he rests before his arraignment. Secret Service steps out. There he is.
Officer.
Walking in. 45 right there, Trump Tower. He makes his way in, waves to the crowd. Not much activity as Trump appears. So as that is happening, you can see people are rounding up outside of the courthouse, outside of Trump Tower. And the mayor, you know him, Mayor Adams from New York, he's warning the ultra extreme MAGA insurrectionaries to behave. He told protesters the city is always ready. Here's what he said.
Specific, credible threat. New York City is always ready. We know that this is a city where our NYPD and other law enforcement entities must be prepared at any given moment for anything to happen in this city. To start, I want to make it clear.
Except carjackings and street level crimes.
The commissioner has stated over and over again, there has been no specific credible threats to our city at this time.
Of course not.
All New Yorkers should go on with their regular activities. That means going
Did you check with the FBI? You might want to give them a call.
To work, going to school. We're going to do our job as we always do. While there may be some rabble-rousers thinking about coming to our city tomorrow, our message is clear and simple. Control yourselves. As always, we will not allow violence or vandalism of any kind. And if one is caught participating in any act of violence, they will be arrested and held accountable.
That's weird. Why are they going to start enforcing the law? I mean, it's been total madness out there. People like Elise Stefanik and others who are actual representatives from New York have explained that that this city has been basically a catastrophe ever since this new law and order team swept into power. It's been focused on one particular type of law and disorder. Really, at this point, Trump is all it's been about. Really, it hasn't been about anybody else. I'm very interested how they're going to manufacture some other insurrection 2.0 like they did last time. So I don't know what they're monitoring social media for. They should go check out Langley. It's not far from New York. You see here, they're telling us Donald Trump arrived in New York on Monday, kicking off a 24-hour visit, landed on a personal plane, landed at LaGuardia, 3:28 p.m., quickly surrounded by the motorcade. Got off Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, first former president to be indicted. Now, we have a little bit more that comes in from NPR. They gave us a chronology of what they expect to happen. They say, what's next after the arraignment? They say for months, a 23-person grand jury heard evidence of this. Trump's denied any wrongdoing. A court appearance set for the history books is scheduled for 2:15 on Tuesday, where they're telling us that the charges will be unsealed. And they should be, right? Everybody expects them to be unsealed. We should see everything. We should be able to go through this with a fine-tooth comb. We'll see. This is the first time that it really seems likely a former president is going to be mugshotted and fingerprinted. It's the first court appearance, is what an arraignment is. Who is Juan Merchan, the New York judge handling Trump's indictment? His caseload has featured some of the charges against Trump and his company. Now he's going to be involved in this prosecution. Merchan is a former prosecutor with 16 years on the bench. Former prosecutors, they're everywhere.
You're right. It's fact.
Is expected to preside on Tuesday over the unprecedented arraignment. Former United States president. Trump will appear to answer charges. We know all about that. Trump said that the judge hates me. He said that he wished he could impose a tougher penalty. Yeah, so that's where Trump is probably getting this he hates me stuff, because he's already ruled against the Trump organization, not Trump himself, but against the Trump organization. The Trump organization went to trial. A jury convicted the company, and Merchan already imposed a $1.6 million fine. So he's already ruled against Trump. When it came time for closing arguments, Merchan let prosecutors claim that Trump knew about the tax cheating maneuvers. The judge said it was only fair because the defense summation had mentioned Trump repeatedly. The defense sought a mistrial over the issue. Merchan said no, obviously. He wanted to keep politics out of the trial. He got annoyed when the Trump organization lawyers sought to introduce new evidence late in trial. So we'll see if they request a notice or a notice for a change of judge, or if they ask for a recusal, a motion for some sort of a new appointment of a new judge because of the historical bias here. I would expect to see that.
Our basic civil liberties. Speaking of someone who cares about basic civil liberties, oh my God, not just no tie.
So what's the bottom line? What do you think is going to happen? Because I think if they put Trump in, if Trump goes in front of a New York jury, he's done. He's convicted.
Yeah, he is. I don't think I'm hopeful that this will be dismissed before he has to get to trial. There are all these
a New York judge who's going to do that.
Okay, so hold on a second. You have to realize that he's going to have 4 cracks at getting this thing dismissed before he gets to trial. First, he has the trial court, has to uphold the charges that are issued by the grand jury. Then he has the appellate division, which is the next highest level, which would be the appellate division from First Department, because this is in Manhattan.
Which would happen post-conviction.
I think before, as far as whether he should be charged on it.
The appellate court's going to step in on the charging decision?
I think that in this circumstance, you're talking about charging a former president of the United States.
But honestly, Joe, should it matter, really, right? If it was anybody else, they wouldn't.
If it was anyone else, there wouldn't be charges brought.
Fair enough, but in theory, there could be charges brought, and the appellate division would not step in on the charging decision.
Yeah, but I mean, this is such a political thing that for them to sit back and say, "Well, we haven't reached our decision yet," seems kind of unlikely.
Not like the New York State appellate courts are full of Trump voters.
No, that's true. That's true. And then after that, it would go to the Court of Appeals, which is the highest. That's the highest court in the state. And then And then he also has another option of going directly to the Supreme Court. You tell me the concept that because this is, let's start with the statute of limitations issue. Okay. So I'm doing my best to take you seriously despite the fact that you're topless.
I'll be serious. I think it's all insane. I think it's like two guys are having like kind of a low level verbal dispute about sports or something in a local bar, and one of them suddenly pulls out a gun and points it at the other guy.
Yeah.
That's a great way to get shot. I mean, that's what the Democrats are doing with this. This is a nothing offense in the best case scenario. And it's blowing open the body politic. But of course, this is, listen, we've seen this kind of decision making from these George Soros prosecutors before. The one who charged the McCloskeys,
Kim Gardner.
And now there's a state filed motion to remove her from her elected position as prosecutor. Because they make insane decisions. They don't enforce the law against the people actually committing crimes, but they enforce the law against their political opponents. It's very 1970s Soviet. Show us the man, we'll show you the crime.
Yeah. And it's an interesting parallel you're drawing between Kim Gardner and Alvin Bragg, because both of them ran on the concept that I'm going to go after these people.
I'm going to go after my political enemies. That was their right.
Yeah, and that's exactly the sort of thing which, like, that should be something that invalidates a district attorney who's supposed to be sitting there neutrally trying to find justice, not be politically motivated. So, yeah, I agree with you that I think that there's a lot of parallels there. But so what I'm saying is this: is there a political leaning? Yes. Does that mean that they'll go so far as to say that we're going to ignore the statute of limitations issue? We're going to ignore and change the law in New York that now you could apply this to a federal charge. We're going to, that those are two very essential things. And the other thing is, I was talking about the rule of lenity, which I didn't really I don't know how much I discussed it in this stream.
Lenity, not lenity.
I keep calling it that. I think it's because of a character in a book. The rule of lenity.
More specifically, if the law is ambiguous, it should be interpreted in favor of the defendant.
Thank you. Yes. So that being the case, with respect to this underlying charge, the predicate charge of that he failed to properly identify the $130,000 payment as an election donation, if he had identified it as that, they probably would have said that he's improperly using campaign funds to pay off Stormy.
Right. But we all remember the Ahmaud Arbery trial, right? The jogger trial.
Yeah.
And those guys, the key issue in that case was whether they were privileged by Georgia's then existing citizens arrest law to attempt an arrest. Because if the arrest was lawful, everything that followed was lawful. And the arrest statute, the citizens arrest statute, was extremely ambiguous because it had been written like 160 years earlier. It had been written in the Civil War. It was using phrases that now, after the 1950 Supreme Court police decisions, are all legal terms of art. But before then were ambiguous. And the citizens arrest statute could have been interpreted by the judge either favorably to the defendants or against the defendants. But the judge never acted at all. The judge said, you know what, I'm going to leave it ambiguous and let the jury decide what that statute means. The doctrine of lenity would have required that the judge instruct the jury that the citizens arrest statute should be interpreted favorably to the defendants in that case. But he didn't do that. He just blew it off. He pretended that it was the job of the jury to interpret the law, which is not the jury's job. And the convictions resulted. And listen, maybe those people would have been convicted anyway. I don't know. I don't care about those people. That's not important to me. I don't care about the parties, but I care a lot about the process. Yeah. And that was a bad process. So in theory, the doctrine of lenity should have been applied there, but the judge just blew it off. Why wouldn't the judge in this case just blow it off?
You're asking, it's a fair comparison. You're asking a good question. And look, and we know that a politically motivated judge can find, if you're motivated in a certain direction, you can twist the law into whatever knots and pretzels you want in order to suit your agenda. I'm not going to dispute that. There's so many different ways they have to contort themselves to keep these charges alive.
But look what they're doing to the January 6th protesters.
I also don't think New York is as bad as DC.
Well, I don't think it is. You're there. I'm not. I haven't been there for 20 years, but
Yeah, I've been to both. And is New York left leaning? Definitely, 100%, 1,000%. It's definitely left leaning. That being said, when I was in D.C., the jury there was so I sat in on a voir dire for a J6 hearing for a J6 hearing with an attorney who was working on behalf of one of the Proud Boys, and they gave a questionnaire to the potential jurors, and in there they had to say if there's any reason or any person who worked in Washington. Every juror had someone. When I say work in Washington, they all lived in Washington. I'm saying someone who works for the government. Every
Right.
one of them had an immediate family relative who either worked for CNN or and I'm talking, when I say immediate, like a sibling, a spouse, a parent,
yeah,
who spent the last 20 years working for Hillary Clinton or for whomever, and it was just one after another. Yeah, my mother been working for Amy Klobuchar for the last 6 years. And you're sitting there and you're like, how the heck? That's what Washington D.C. is. Every one of them had been watching it's like they were like TiVo. They would freaking TiVo the J6 hearings. And it's like, and now they're supposed to sit here and come into a jury and try and say, oh yeah, I can be totally impartial in deciding on these January 6th. It's like, I didn't know anyone in my jurisdiction who like was even watching these J6 hearings, and they're all sitting there glued to the TV, and now they're coming here trying to decide whether this J6 defendant is innocent or guilty. That's insanity. That's what you have in Washington. It's not the same in New York.
Right. So very few people have lived in DC. And I can tell you, I'm sure Joe knows, that the only people who actually live in DC are extremely poor people or high-level government officials or high-level media people. That's who lives in Washington, D.C. So when you pull your jury pool, that's who you're pulling from in Washington, D.C. That's it.
Right. Whereas in New York, you're pulling from a mostly left-leaning jury pool. I'm not going to kid you. Like the elitists there are gross, but it's like, you know, even amongst the black community in New York, they're not as anti-Trump as they are even in DC. At least from the limited interactions that I've seen. So I don't think that he's quite the dead man walking that everyone thinks he is. But that doesn't look. Is he going to have a fair opportunity? I don't know.